He invited his ex-wife to the wedding purely to humiliate her in front of his entire family. But when that white limousine pulled up and she stepped out with 2 twins and a millionaire, he knew he had dug his own grave. Marcelo held the wedding invitation in his hands, a smile playing on his lips that sent shivers down one's spine. It was the smile of a man meticulously planning something cruel, the kind that made your stomach churn just to witness. He typed a message on his phone, paused, deleted, typed again. He wanted every word to slice like a well-aimed dagger. Isabella, you simply must come to Leticia's wedding. I want you to see how well I'm doing without you. He sent it, chuckling darkly to himself. The vengeance was just beginning. Across the bustling Singaporean cityscape, Isabella stared at her phone, her hands trembling. It wasn't just the invitation. It was the way he had phrased it, as if he were a king summoning a beggar for his amusement. She knew exactly what Marcelo was doing. He wanted her to appear broken, destitute, so he could parade her before his family, proving how right he had been to abandon her. This was his goal since the divorce, to prove she was worthless. Miguel and Mateus played on the floor of their modest HDB flat when they saw their mother collapse onto the sofa. The twins were 4 years old, but they already sensed when something was wrong. Miguel, always the more vocal, dropped his toy car and ran to her. "Mummy, why are you crying?" Mateus followed close behind, his usual shyness momentarily forgotten, equally concerned. Isabella tried to wipe her tears away too quickly, but couldn't hide how shattered she was inside. "It's nothing, my loves," she lied, pulling both boys into a tight hug. But Miguel wasn't easily fooled. He had seen his mother cry many times since his father left. Is it because of Daddy again? The innocent question hit Isabella like a punch to the gut. How could she explain to 2 children that their own father hated them so much he wanted to humiliate their mother in front of everyone? Mateus, who rarely spoke about his father, whispered softly, "Mummy, does Daddy really not like us?" His voice was so small, so broken, that Isabella felt her heart shatter into 1,000 pieces. She looked at those 2 boys, too beautiful for this cruel world, and something inside her completely snapped. Tears began to stream uncontrollably. Isabella remembered the day she told Marcelo she was pregnant with twins. He remained silent for long minutes, looking at her as if it were her fault. 2 children. Isabella, 2. As if it were a tragedy, as if she had intentionally ruined his life. She should have realized then that he would never love those children, but she believed that once they were born, everything would change. How foolish. Marcelo only grew worse. "My princes," she said, holding the boys' faces between her hands. "You are the most precious things in this world. If someone can't see that, the problem lies with that person, never with you." Miguel listened intently, as if engraving every word. Mateus just snuggled closer into his mother's lap. They didn't fully understand, but they felt she was trying to protect them from something very bad. The phone suddenly rang, an unknown number. Isabella hesitated before answering. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was calm, masculine, but there was something about it that commanded attention. "Isabella, my name is Eduardo. I overheard a conversation I shouldn't have." She frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" "Eduardo Sichet on the other end. Your ex-husband was at the restaurant downstairs from my unit, talking far too loudly about his plan to humiliate you at the wedding." Isabella's blood ran cold. "What plan?" Eduardo paused, as if choosing his words carefully. "He said he invited you knowing you don't have money for nice clothes, that he wants the whole family to see you in the dirt." Those were his words. Isabella closed her eyes, feeling anger rise in her throat. Of course, that was it. Marcelo was always too cowardly to confront her alone. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, suspicious. Eduardo took a deep breath. "Because I've been through something similar. I know how much it hurts to be humiliated by someone who should protect you." There was real pain in his voice, something Isabella recognized immediately. It was the voice of someone who had been broken and managed to rebuild themselves. "And why else?" he continued. "I saw your children playing in the common area of the building yesterday. 2 beautiful children, too precious to have a father who doesn't value them." Miguel tugged at his mother's blouse. "Who is it, Mummy?" Isabella covered the phone and whispered, "A man who wants to help us." Miguel's eyes lit up with curiosity. Mateus just watched, as he always did when something new happened. "Help how?" Miguel insisted. "Because a 4-year-old wants to know everything." "I don't know yet, darling." "Let Mommy talk," Isabella replied. Eduardo spoke again. "May I make a proposal? I know it might sound crazy, but hear me out." She looked at her children, at the cursed invitation on the table, at the small apartment she barely managed to afford. "I'm listening." Eduardo paused again. I have the means to, shall we say, level the playing field, make your ex-husband swallow his own words. How? Curiosity was killing Isabella. Eduardo chuckled softly. But it wasn't a malicious laugh. It was the laugh of someone about to mete out justice. Trust me. Just for today? Isabella looked at Miguel and Mateus, who watched her with those big eyes, full of hope. They deserved to see their mother happy, at least once. They deserved to feel special, as every child should. Why would you do this for us? You don't even know us. Eduardo was quiet for so long that Isabella thought the call had dropped. When he spoke again, his voice was choked. Because when I was your children's age, my father humiliated me in front of everyone, and no one defended me. I never forgot how small I felt that day. Tears returned to Isabella's eyes, but this time they were different. They weren't tears of pain. They were tears of someone who had just found an angel when she needed one most. I accept, she whispered. But on one condition. My children cannot be harmed in this. If it's dangerous for them in any way, Isabella, Eduardo interrupted gently. Your children will feel like princes today, I promise you, on my honor. There was so much sincerity in his voice that she believed him immediately. What do I need to do? Eduardo chuckled. And this time, his laugh was full of mischief. Just trust, and get ready, because you three are going to put on the biggest show that family has ever seen. When Isabella hung up the phone, Miguel was already beside her, curious. Mummy, is the man going to help us? She smiled, and it was the first real smile in weeks. Yes, my love. Today, we're going to the wedding like royalty. Mateus perked up for the first time. We're going to be real princes? Isabella hugged her two children, feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Across the city, Marcelo finished telling his mother how Isabella would appear at the wedding. Mother, you'll see. She'll arrive all disheveled, in old clothes, dragging those children along. Everyone will realize I was right to leave her. Madame Miriam shook her head in disgust. Serves her right, son. Who destroys a family? But Marcelo had no idea he had just signed his own sentence, because Eduardo Mendez wasn't just a kind neighbor. He was the man who would turn the worst day of Isabella's life into the best. And Marcelo? Well, Marcelo was about to discover that some vengeances have a way of backfiring on those who plan them. The game was set, and for the first time in years, Isabella held all the cards. Eduardo Mendez stood in front of the mirror in his penthouse apartment, deciding this would be the most important day of his business life. Not because of the millions he moved daily, but because he would finally use his power for something that truly mattered. He had heard every poisonous word Marcelo spoke at the restaurant, every cruel detail of the plan to destroy Isabella, and it stirred something very deep within him. 20 minutes later, Eduardo knocked on Isabella's apartment door. When she opened it, he almost couldn't hide his surprise. Even with eyes red from crying, even in her simple clothes and messy hair, she had something special, a dignity that all the humiliations in the world couldn't erase. Eduardo? She asked uncertainly. He smiled the gentlest smile he could manage. Hi, Isabella. I came to meet the princes who live here. Miguel ran out before his mother even finished inviting him in. You're the man from the phone, he shouted excitedly, stopping right in front of Eduardo and looking him up and down with that unfiltered child's curiosity. Mateus followed more slowly, hiding somewhat behind his mother, but observing everything intently. Eduardo knelt to be at the boy's height, and Isabella noticed he did it naturally, unhurriedly. Miguel and Mateus, right? Eduardo extended his hand to greet each one, as if they were important adults. The twins beamed at the attention. Mummy said you're going to help us be princes, Miguel said animatedly. Eduardo chuckled, but it was a warm, affectionate laugh. You already are princes. We're just going to make everyone realize it. Mateus finally approached. Really? His voice was timid but full of hope. Really, Eduardo confirmed. And Isabella saw something in his eyes that made her trust him completely. It wasn't pity or charity. It was genuine respect for her and the boys. But first, I need to tell you who I really am. Isabella frowned. What do you mean? Eduardo stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. I'm not just a neighbor who overheard a conversation by chance. Eduardo turned to her, and there was something different in his posture now. More serious, more imposing. My name is Eduardo Mendez. I own Mendez Corporation, one of Singapore's leading logistics and supply chain solution providers. Isabella felt her legs wobble. She knew that name. Everyone knew it. You're joking? She whispered. Eduardo took a wallet from his pocket and showed her some cards. CEO, President, Founder, all true. Why didn't you tell me on the phone? Isabella was trying to process the information. Eduardo sighed, sitting on the sofa next to the boys, who continued playing as if nothing had changed. Because I wanted you to trust me as a person, not as a wealthy businessman. He looked at Miguel and Mateos. And because I knew you wouldn't accept help if you thought it was charity. Miguel dropped his car and climbed onto Eduardo's lap without ceremony. Uncle Eduardo, are you really rich? Eduardo laughed at the direct question. Yes, I am. Mateos also approached, curious. Richer than Daddy? The innocent question brought a heavy silence to the room. Eduardo looked at Isabella, who was clearly uncomfortable. Much richer than your father, Mateus. But you know what makes me richer than him? What? Both asked at the same time. Eduardo hugged the boys. It's having you two here with me now. Your father lost the greatest treasures of his life when he abandoned you. The words came out so sincerely that Isabella felt her eyes well up again, but this time they were good tears. Someone finally saw her children as she saw them, as the special children they were. Eduardo, Isabella said softly, why do you want to do this? Really? He was quiet for a moment, playing with Miguel's hair, who had snuggled into his lap. Because when I was 7, my father took me to one of his company parties. I was all dressed up, excited to meet his colleagues. Eduardo's voice grew softer, sadder. But when we got there, he told everyone I was the maid's son, that my mother had tricked him into believing he was my father. Eduardo stopped, took a deep breath. Everyone laughed. I stood there, 7 years old, being humiliated by my own father in front of strangers. Isabella placed her hand on his shoulder. Eduardo, he shook his head. I never forgot how small I felt that day, invisible, as if I was worth nothing. Mateus, who was listening to everything, despite his young age, approached Eduardo. Uncle, were you sad? Eduardo smiled, even with teary eyes. Very sad, Mateus. But do you know what happened next? The boys shook their heads. I decided that when I grew up, I would never let anyone feel the way I felt that day. Miguel clapped his hands. Like a superhero? Eduardo laughed. Like a superhero, Miguel. And your father? Isabella asked softly. Eduardo became serious again. He died some years ago. Poor, alone, after losing everything gambling. He looked at the boys. Do you know the last thing he told me? Isabella shook her head. That he regretted rejecting me. That I was the only good thing he had done in his life. And he was too foolish to realize it. The silence that followed was heavy, but not uncomfortable. It was the silence of people who understood each other without needing many words. That's why, Eduardo continued, when I heard your ex-husband planning to humiliate you and, by extension, these boys, I knew I couldn't stand by. He looked directly into Isabella's eyes. Because you three deserve to be treated like royalty. And today, that's exactly what's going to happen. Miguel jumped off Eduardo's lap, excited. Are we going to be real kings? Eduardo stood up too. You're going to be the kings of the party, Miguel. Everyone will stop to look when you arrive. Mateos clasped his hands excitedly. And Mummy will be a queen? Eduardo looked at Isabella, and there was something different in his gaze now. Something that made her heart race. Your mother has always been a queen, Mateus. It's just that today everyone will realize it. What exactly are you planning? Isabella asked, a little nervous. Eduardo smiled, and this time his smile had a mischievous glint. First, we're going to make you shine as you deserve. Royal clothes, a suitable car, the whole production. He paused dramatically. And then we're going to this wedding to show your ex-husband he made the biggest mistake of his life. But what if he finds out who you are? Isabella was worried. Eduardo chuckled softly. Ah, Isabella, that's the best part. He approached her, speaking quietly so the boys wouldn't hear everything. Marcelo has worked for me for 3 years at the West District branch. He's never seen me in person, only knows my signature on documents. Isabella's jaw dropped. Are you serious? Completely serious. He always boasts about having important contacts in the company, knowing influential people. The truth is, he's just an ordinary salesman who lives bragging about things he doesn't have. Eduardo laughed. Today he's going to discover that the boss, whom he often badmouths behind his back, is dating the woman he abandoned. Miguel tugged Eduardo's trousers. Uncle, Daddy works for you? Eduardo knelt again. Yes, he does, but don't you worry about that now, okay? Mateus also approached. He's going to get angry. Eduardo looked at Isabella, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Perhaps Mateus, but sometimes people need to get angry to learn to be better. Eduardo, Isabella said, her voice trembling. Are you sure about this? I don't want my children to witness a fight. Eduardo stood up and placed his hands on her shoulders. Isabella, trust me. There won't be a fight. There will be justice, polite, elegant, but definitive justice. He looked at the boys who were watching everything intently. And these princes here will see that there are people in the world who truly value them. Isabella took a deep breath. For the first time in years, she felt she wasn't alone, that someone was truly on her side. Okay, she finally said. But promise you'll protect them? Eduardo smiled, and it was the most sincere smile she had ever seen. Isabella, from today on, I will protect all three of you, as if you were my own family. Miguel and Mateus ran to hug Eduardo, who embraced them with genuine affection. Uncle Eduardo, are you going to be our new daddy? Miguel asked innocently. Eduardo looked at Isabella over the boys' heads, and there was something in his eyes that made her heart skip a beat. Who knows, Miguel? Who knows? And in that moment, Isabella knew her life was about to change forever. For the better. Isabella spent the entire night awake, staring at the ceiling and wondering if she was doing the right thing. Eduardo seemed sincere, but something in the back of her mind told her that stories too good to be true usually were exactly that well-told lies. She looked at Miguel and Mateus, sleeping soundly in the bed beside her, breathing peacefully, and felt her chest tighten. What if it was all a cruel trick? What if Eduardo was Marcelo's friend, plotting something even worse? When the phone rang at 7 a.m., she had already been awake for hours. Good morning, Isabella. Ready for the big day? Eduardo's voice sounded animated, full of energy. Isabella took a deep breath before replying. Eduardo, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. On the other end, he became serious. Of course, you can ask anything. Isabella closed her eyes. Why do you really want to do this? And don't give me that kindness story. No one spends so much money on strangers without a reason. The silence on the other end was too long. When Eduardo spoke again, his voice was different, heavier, more real. You're right. I didn't tell you everything. Isabella felt her stomach churn. What? What else is there? Eduardo sighed deeply. Isabella, I didn't move into this building by chance. I bought the apartment here because I wanted to be close to you. Her blood ran cold. What do you mean close to us? Are you stalking me? It's not that, Eduardo said quickly. Let me explain everything, please. Isabella was ready to hang up, but something in his voice made her hesitate. Just tell me, Eduardo. He took another deep breath. 6 months ago, Marcelo tried to defraud me, a multi-million-dollar scam that almost destroyed my company. The words hit Isabella like punches to the gut. What scam? Eduardo was quiet for a few seconds. He forged my signature on contracts, diverted SGD 2 million from the company. Isabella felt her legs wobble. You're joking? Eduardo continued, his voice increasingly tense. I had two options. Have him arrested, or investigate why an ordinary employee would do such a thing. I chose to investigate. Isabella sat on the bed, trying to process the information. And what did you find? Eduardo paused dramatically. I found out he had an ex-wife and 2 children he abandoned. I found out he was desperate for money to impress his new girlfriend. That's why you came after me. Isabella was beginning to understand. Eduardo sighed. At first, yes, I wanted to understand what kind of woman married a man capable of stealing millions. His voice grew softer. But when I saw you working at the supermarket, taking care of the boys alone, paying all the bills honestly, I realized you were the victim, not the accomplice. Miguel appeared at the bedroom door, rubbing his eyes. Mummy, who are you talking to? Isabella covered the phone. To Uncle Eduardo. Love. Go back to bed. But Miguel approached, curious as always. Uncle Eduardo, today is Prince Day. Isabella returned to the phone, and Eduardo had heard everything. Isabella, he said softly, I know lying wasn't right, but everything I said about wanting to protect you is true. Eduardo, Isabella said, her voice trembling. Did you get your money back? He was quiet. I did. Marcelo returned everything when he found out I knew. But do you know what part revolted me the most? Isabella waited. When I confronted him. Do you know what he said? Eduardo paused, and there was real anger in his voice. He said it was your fault, that you forced him to steal because you demanded too much from him. The anger that surged through Isabella's throat was so intense she had to hold herself back from screaming. He said that? Eduardo confirmed. He did. And it was at that moment I decided he would pay for everything, not just the theft, but for destroying a family and still having the nerve to blame the victim. Isabella wiped away a tear that escaped. So that's why you want to help me? It's not kindness, it's revenge. It started as revenge, Eduardo admitted. But yesterday, when I met you and the boys, He stopped, as if choosing his words. Yesterday it became protection, it became justice, and it became something I didn't expect to feel. Isabella closed her eyes. What? Eduardo took a deep breath. It became love, Isabella, for you and for the boys. Mateus appeared at the door too, still sleepy. Mommy, where's breakfast? Isabella looked at her two children, with their messy hair and sleepy faces, and made her decision. Eduardo, do you promise my children won't get hurt in this? He didn't hesitate. I promise on my life. Isabella sighed. Then let's do this, but your way, completely. 2 hours later, Eduardo knocked on the door, carrying 3 enormous boxes. Miguel and Mateus ran to open it before their mother even got close. Uncle Eduardo, what's in the box? Miguel shouted animatedly. Eduardo smiled, but Isabella noticed a hint of nervousness in his smile. Prince clothes, he replied. But before we open them, I need to tell you something serious. Eduardo knelt in front of the twins, getting to their height. Miguel, Mateus, you know we're going to the wedding today, and you'll see your daddy, right? The boys nodded. Mateus, who was always quieter when his father was mentioned, hid behind his brother. Are you afraid of him? Eduardo asked softly. Miguel shook his head, trying to be brave, but Mateus whispered quietly. He shouts a lot. The confession came out so small, so scared, that Eduardo felt his chest tighten. Isabella approached, placing a hand on Mateus's shoulder. He won't shout today, my love. Uncle Eduardo will be with us. Eduardo looked at her, then at the boys. Mateus, can I tell you a secret? The boy peeked out from behind his brother, curious. What secret? Eduardo smiled. I was afraid of my father when I was little too. He also shouted a lot. Mateus moved a little closer. And then what did you do? Eduardo took his small hand. I grew up and learned that fathers who shout do it because they're afraid of not being important. Miguel, who was listening to everything, asked, Is our daddy afraid? Eduardo nodded. Very afraid, Miguel. Afraid that you'll grow up and realize he's not a good father. Mateus frowned thoughtfully, but we already know that. The innocent and devastating answer made Eduardo laugh, but it was a sad laugh. Exactly, Mateus. That's why he's trying to make your mummy look bad. So you won't realize who's really bad is him. Isabella sat on the floor beside them. Boys, today you'll see many people. Some people might say bad things about Mummy. Miguel became serious. What kind of things? Isabella took a deep breath. They might say Mummy doesn't take good care of you, that you're badly dressed, ill-mannered. Mateus was indignant. But that's a lie. Mummy takes super good care of us. Eduardo smiled. This time a genuine smile. It's a lie indeed, Mateus. And today everyone will see the truth. He pointed to the boxes. How about we look at these clothes? Miguel and Mateus ran to the boxes as if it were Christmas. When they opened them, their eyes sparkled with admiration. They were perfect children's tuxedos, sized just for them, with patent leather shoes and even bow ties. Wow, Miguel shouted. Like a prince in a movie? Mateus picked up a bow tie, enchanted. Uncle Eduardo, are these really ours? Eduardo nodded. Just yours. And there's more. He opened the third box, revealing a royal blue dress that made Isabella gasp. It was the most beautiful dress she had ever seen. Eduardo, she whispered. You didn't have to. Yes, I did, he replied, looking into her eyes. You deserve to feel like the queen you always were. Miguel and Mateus ran off to change, too excited to stand still. While they got ready in the bedroom, Eduardo approached Isabella. There's one more thing I didn't tell you. She looked at him, concerned. What now? Eduardo took a key from his pocket. The limousine I rented isn't rented. Isabella frowned. What do you mean? He smiled, but there was nervousness in his smile. It's mine. I bought it yesterday for you. Isabella felt her legs wobble again. Eduardo, are you crazy? Why would you do that? He approached her, holding her hands in his. Because for the first time in my life, I found something worth more than all my millions. He looked into her eyes, and there was absolute truth there. I found a family I want to protect forever. At that moment, Miguel and Mateus emerged from the room, impeccable in their tuxedos, and even Isabella was moved to see how handsome they looked. Mommy! Miguel shouted, twirling to show off his outfit. I look like a real prince. Mateus Morshai just smiled, but it was a smile Isabella hadn't seen in months. Eduardo knelt and adjusted their ties. Now, the real princes are ready. He looked at Isabella and the queen. When Isabella stepped out of the room in the blue dress, Eduardo felt his heart stop. She was absolutely stunning. Miguel and Mateus clapped, excited. "Mommy turned into a princess," Mateus shouted, forgetting his shyness. Eduardo approached her, offering his arm. "Ready to give your ex-husband the life lesson he deserves?" Isabella looked at her children, beautiful and happy for the first time in a long time, then at Eduardo, who had restored her family's dignity. "More than ready," she replied, and for the first time in years, she felt truly invincible. The white limousine gleamed under the afternoon sun like a spaceship that had descended from the sky. Eduardo drove personally with Isabella beside him in the front seat, radiant in the royal blue dress that seemed made especially for her. In the back seat, Miguel and Mateus were glued to the window, waving at every car that passed. "Uncle Eduardo, everyone is looking at us!" Miguel shouted excitedly. Mateus, normally shy, was equally thrilled. "Mommy, we're famous!" As the church began to appear on the horizon, Eduardo felt his heart race. It wasn't nervousness about the confrontation to come. It was anticipation to see Marcelo's face when he realized he had completely underestimated the woman he abandoned. "Isabella," he said softly, "how are you feeling?" She looked at him, and there was a confidence in her eyes that hadn't existed that morning. "I'm feeling like I've never felt in my life powerful." The church was packed, cars parked everywhere, well-dressed guests walking towards the main entrance. Marcelo stood at the door, greeting people as if he were the groom, strutting in his dark suit that he probably bought on installment. Beside him, Madame Miriam received greetings with that fake smile of someone who thinks they are better than everyone else. "Look there," Eduardo pointed discreetly. "The reception committee." Miguel stretched to see through the window. "Is that Daddy?" His voice was curious, without bitterness, as if he were seeing any stranger. Mateus also looked, but remained quiet. Eduardo noticed the boys' different reactions. "Miguel, Mateus, remember what we talked about. You are real princes. No matter what anyone says, you are special." The boys nodded, serious as little soldiers preparing for battle. Eduardo parked the limousine right in front of the main entrance, where normally only wedding cars stop. Immediately, dozens of heads turned. Guests stopped chatting, pulled out phones to take pictures, began whispering among themselves. Who could have arrived? Must be some celebrity. What a beautiful limousine. Marcelo also looked, but from a distance, still not recognizing who was inside the car. Eduardo got out first, impeccable, in a black tuxedo that cost more than Marcelo's annual salary. He had that natural presence of someone in command, that posture of a man accustomed to being respected. He circled the limousine slowly, building suspense, savoring the moment. All eyes were glued to him. Who is that man? He looks like a CEO. So elegant. Even Madame Miriam stopped greeting guests to observe. When Eduardo opened the door for Isabella, it was as if time had frozen. She emerged from the limousine with the elegance of a real princess, the blue dress fluttering gently in the afternoon breeze, her hair tied in a sophisticated chignon she had learned to do by watching tutorials online. The soft makeup enhanced the natural beauty that worries and sorrows had hidden for so long. She was absolutely stunning. "My God," an old lady whispered too loudly. "Who is that woman? She looks like a TV actress. What a marvelous dress." Isabella smiled, extending her hand to Eduardo with a naturalness that surprised even herself. She felt as if she had been born for this moment, as if all the pain of the past few years had merely been preparation for this transformation. But the real show began when Miguel and Mateus stepped out of the limousine. The two boys were impeccable in their children's tuxedos, with perfectly adjusted bow ties and combed hair. Miguel emerged first, waving to everyone as if he were a little prince visiting his subjects. "Hi everyone!" he shouted, eliciting emotional giggles from the ladies present. Mateus followed close behind, more restrained, but equally elegant. He held Eduardo's hand naturally, as if he were his real father. "Uncle Eduardo, everyone's looking?" he whispered. But he didn't seem scared. He seemed proud. Eduardo knelt and adjusted his bow tie. "That's because you two are the most handsome boys at this party." Mateus smiled, and it was a smile that melted the hearts of all the women present. It was at this moment that Marcelo finally recognized who had arrived. The fake smile vanished from his face, as if he had been punched in the stomach. His mouth fell open, his eyes widened, his face turned paper white. "It can't be," he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. Madame Miriam followed her son's gaze and also froze. "Marcelo, is that Isabella?" Her voice was strange, incredulous. "Yes," Marcelo replied, still in shock. "But how? Where did she get money for all this?" Madame Miriam watched the scene with her mouth agape. The daughter-in-law she had always criticized, always called a gold digger and opportunist, was standing there looking like a queen. And not only that, she was accompanied by a man who exuded power and money from every pore. Eduardo approached the church entrance with Isabella on one arm and the two boys walking alongside. Every step was calculated. Every movement carried the weight of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. When they reached Marcelo, Eduardo stopped and smiled. It wasn't a mocking smile. It was the polite smile of someone about to give a lesson in etiquette. "Good afternoon," Eduardo said, extending his hand to Marcelo. "You must be Miguel and Mateus's father. I'm Eduardo Mendez, Isabella's boyfriend." The introduction was made with that elegant formality that only truly classy people can master. Marcelo stood still for a few seconds, processing the information before extending his hand rather awkwardly. "Marcelo," he replied, trying to disguise the shock in his voice. "Eduardo Mendez. That name sounds familiar." Eduardo smiled wider, as if enjoying the situation. "Must be a coincidence. I run a logistics company here in the city." Marcelo's eyes widened. Mendez Corporation was the company where he worked, but it was impossible that this man was… It couldn't be. Madame Miriam interjected, suddenly all polite. "What a pleasure to meet you, Eduardo and Isabella." She looked at her ex-daughter-in-law as if seeing a ghost. "You look different." Isabella smiled, but it was a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you, Madame Miriam. The boys are eager to see the family." As if rehearsed, Miguel and Mateus positioned themselves on either side of Eduardo. "Grandma Miriam!" Miguel shouted excitedly. "Look how handsome we are!" Madame Miriam looked at her grandchildren, whom she rarely saw, impeccable in expensive tuxedos, and felt a pang in her chest. They were too handsome, too happy, too well cared for. Nothing like the image of abandoned, ill-kept children Marcelo had painted for her. Mateus, encouraged by his brother, also spoke. "Grandma, Uncle Eduardo bought us these clothes." The innocent sentence was like a bomb exploding in the middle of the conversation. Madame Miriam looked at Eduardo with completely different eyes. A man who spent money buying expensive clothes for children who weren't even his own was very different from what she had imagined. "Eduardo." Marcelo tried to regain control of the situation. "What company did you say you have?" Eduardo continued smiling, savoring every second. "Mendez Corporation. Perhaps you've heard of it. We work with logistics and transport." Marcelo's world collapsed. Mendez Corporation was exactly the company where he had worked for 3 years. And Eduardo Mendez was the owner. The Praedada, the most powerful man in the entire company. You're the owner of Mendez Corporation?" Marcelo stammered, his face growing paler and paler. Eduardo nodded modestly. "Yes, I am. A family business my father started, and I managed to expand a little. A little. The company was worth over SGD 50 million. Marcelo had worked for 3 years, earning a modest salary for the man who was now dating his ex-wife. Madame Miriam swallowed hard. For years, she had criticized Isabella, saying she was worthless, didn't know how to choose a man, was a loser. Now she was standing in front of one of the most important businessmen in Singapore, who treated Isabella like a queen and her grandchildren like princes. The situation was so embarrassing she didn't know where to look. "Well," Eduardo said, looking at the expensive watch on his wrist, "I think we'd better go in. We don't want to be late for the ceremony." He offered his arm to Isabella again. "Shall we, darling?" Miguel and Mateus positioned themselves beside them, like a perfect family posing for a photo. The image would break the heart of anyone who knew the real story. As they entered the church, they left Marcelo and Madame Miriam standing at the door, still processing what had just happened. "Marcelo," Madame Miriam whispered, "you didn't tell me Isabella was dating your company's owner." Marcelo couldn't answer. He was too busy trying to understand how his life had turned into a nightmare in a matter of minutes. Inside the church, heads turned to observe the family that had arrived. Isabella walked with the posture of a queen, Eduardo with the confidence of a king, and Miguel and Mateus, like 2 little princes who had finally found their kingdom. The vengeance was just beginning, but Marcelo already knew he had lost forever. The ceremony had ended, and now everyone was heading to the ballroom. Isabella walked beside Eduardo, feeling the curious and admiring glances of all the guests. Miguel and Mateus ran ahead, excited for the party to come. It was impossible not to notice how people whispered as they passed. "Who is that beautiful woman? What an elegant man! Look how well dressed the children are!" Marcelo followed a few meters behind, trying to process the situation. His mind was in a whirl. The man dating his ex-wife was literally his boss. The man to whom he lied, saying he had important contacts in the company. The man who signed his paycheck every month. The irony was so cruel it hurt physically. In the ballroom, Eduardo deliberately chose a table right in the center, where everyone could clearly see Isabella and the boys. He pulled out a chair for her with that natural gentleness of a true gentleman. Miguel and Mateus settled beside them, behaving like little lords at a royal dinner. Their transformation was so complete that even the waiters treated them with special respect. "Uncle Eduardo," Miguel asked softly, "why is everyone looking at us?" Eduardo smiled, adjusting the boy's bow tie. "Because you are the most handsome princess at the party, Miguel. People are impressed when they see true royalty." Mateus, who was observing the other guests, whispered, "Mummy is more beautiful than all the other women here." It was then that Aunt Sebastiana, Madame Miriam's sister, approached the table. She was a woman in her 60s, one of those who likes to know everyone's business and spread gossip throughout the family. "Isabella, dear," she said with that false tone of interest, "what a surprise to see you here, and so well dressed." The comment was loaded with thinly disguised venom. Eduardo stood up politely to greet the lady. "Good evening. I'm Eduardo Mendez, Isabella's boyfriend." Aunt Sebastiana looked him up and down, evaluating the expensive suit, the designer watch, the posture of a successful man. "Mendez, that surname sounds familiar." Eduardo smiled. "Perhaps you've heard of Mendez Corporation?" "It's my company." Aunt Sebastiana's jaw almost unhinged. Mendez Corporation was one of the best-known companies in Singapore. It always appeared in newspapers, business magazines, and lists of the state's top entrepreneurs. "You are that Eduardo Mendez?" He nodded modestly. "That's me." Aunt Sebastiana looked at Isabella with completely different eyes. The abandoned poor thing she always criticized was dating a multi-millionaire. At that moment, Marcelo finally found the courage to approach. He came walking slowly, like someone going to his own funeral. "Eduardo," he said, trying to sound casual. "Can we talk for a minute?" Eduardo looked at Isabella, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "Of course, Marcelo, but right here is fine. We have no secrets." Marcelo swallowed hard. He wanted to talk away from the children, away from Isabella, away from everyone. But Eduardo didn't move from the table. "It's about the company," Marcelo began, his voice sounding strange. "I've worked at Mendez Corporation for 3 years, at the West District branch." Eduardo feigned surprise. "Really? What an incredible coincidence. And here I am dating your ex-wife without knowing that connection." Miguel, who was listening to the conversation, looked at his father with curiosity. "Daddy, do you work for Uncle Eduardo?" The innocent question echoed through the table like a gunshot. Aunt Sebastiana's eyes widened. Other relatives who had approached to peek also heard. Marcelo wanted to disappear under the floor. "Work?" he confirmed, his voice barely audible. Eduardo smiled, placing a hand on Miguel's shoulder. "What a small world, isn't it, champ? Your father is one of my employees." The word employee was spoken with such weight that even Marcelo felt the impact. Not a collaborator, not a partner, an employee. A mere employee. Madame Miriam approached the table, drawn by curiosity and embarrassment. For years, she had badmouthed Isabella to the entire family. She said that her daughter-in-law was a gold digger, that she didn't know how to take care of her children, that she was a loser. Now she was seeing the same woman being courted by the richest man she had ever met. "Eduardo," she tried to make conversation. "What a wonderful company you have. We always see your campaigns on television." Eduardo thanked her politely. "Thank you, Madame Miriam. It's a job I do with a lot of love." He looked at Isabella. "Actually, Isabella helps me a lot with ideas to improve employee welfare. She has a special sensitivity for understanding people's needs." Marcelo felt a stab in his chest. Isabella giving advice on how to treat employees to his own boss. The irony was becoming unbearable. "Isabella has always been very observant," he said, trying to diminish her importance. Eduardo looked at him with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Observant and intelligent. That's why I fell in love with her." Mateus, who had been quiet until then, suddenly spoke. "Uncle Eduardo, are you going to marry Mummy?" The question came out so naturally, so innocently, that it caught everyone by surprise. Eduardo looked at Isabella, then at the boy. "If she accepts, Mateus, I'd love to be a real daddy to you two." Miguel clapped his hands excitedly. "We want you to. You're much better than the other daddy." The other daddy was right there, hearing everything. Marcelo felt as if he had been punched in the gut. His own children were publicly rejecting him in front of the entire family, preferring a man they had met 2 days ago. And the worst part was that he knew he deserved it. He truly had been a terrible father. "Children," Aunt Sebastiana interjected, trying to smooth things over. "You shouldn't talk about your father like that." But Miguel, with the brutal honesty of children, replied, "Why not, Auntie? He never calls us, never comes to visit. Uncle Eduardo has played with us more in 2 days than he has in 2 years." The silence that followed was awkward. Everyone knew the child was right. Marcelo had indeed abandoned his children after the divorce. He only appeared when he wanted to annoy Isabella or when someone asked about the children. Eduardo noticed the general discomfort and decided to change the subject. "How about we order dinner?" he suggested, calling a waiter. "Boys, what would you like to eat?" Miguel and Mateus brightened up, momentarily forgetting the adult tension around them. As they chose their dishes, Eduardo whispered in Isabella's ear. "Are you okay?" She nodded, squeezing his hand under the table. "Never better." Marcelo remained standing there, unsure whether to stay or leave. His entire strategy to humiliate Isabella had backfired on him. Now he was the one being humiliated in front of his entire family by his own children. And the worst was yet to come. He didn't know it yet, but Eduardo was only just beginning to reveal his secrets. The night had barely begun, and Marcelo already knew he would never be the same after this wedding. Dinner was being served when Leticia, the bride, finally managed to break free from greetings and photos to visit the guests' tables. She was radiant in her white dress, smiling from ear to ear, until she stopped at the table where the commotion, which everyone was whispering about, was taking place. "Isabella," she said, surprised. "Wow, you're unrecognizable. What an incredible transformation." Leticia had always been different from the rest of the family. She was the only one who never criticized Isabella during the marriage and who was outraged when she learned of the abandonment. "Leticia, congratulations on your wedding," Isabella replied, standing up to hug her cousin. "You look beautiful." Eduardo also stood up politely. "Eduardo Méndez, Isabella's boyfriend. Congratulations on your union." Leticia looked at him, impressed. "The Eduardo Méndez? Seriously? You know Uncle Eduardo?" Miguel asked, curious. Leticia knelt to be at the twins' height. "Yes, I do. He's very famous, always on TV." Mateus approached shyly. "Auntie Leticia, Uncle Eduardo is going to be our new daddy." The phrase came out so sweet, so hopeful, that even the waiters serving the table were moved. Leticia looked at Marcelo, who was a few meters away, watching everything with a grim expression. "Marcelo," she said loudly enough for him to hear, "how lucky Isabella is to have found a man who values her and the children." The comment was loaded with thinly disguised criticism. Everyone understood the message. At that moment, Aunt Sebastiana, who was dying of curiosity, asked the question everyone wanted to ask, but didn't dare. "Eduardo, may I ask how you and Isabella met?" Eduardo smiled, looking at her affectionately. "It's an interesting story, actually." He paused, savoring the moment. "We met because of Marcelo." Everyone leaned in closer, wanting to hear the story. Marcelo felt his blood run cold. Eduardo continued with that calm of someone who holds all the cards. "A few months ago, I discovered that an employee of my company had attempted a multi-million-dollar fraud against us. The silence was absolute. He forged my signature, diverted SGD 2 million. Madame Miriam's eyes widened. 2 million? Eduardo nodded gravely. When we investigated, we discovered it was Marcelo. The bomb exploded in the middle of the table. Aunt Sebastiana covered her mouth, shocked. Leticia looked at her cousin with disappointment. Madame Miriam turned white as paper. "Marcelo, is this true?" Marcelo tried to deny it, but no sound came out. Eduardo continued relentlessly. "When I confronted him, do you know what he said?" Everyone waited in suspense. That it was Isabella's fault, that she demanded too much from him, that he needed the money to support his family. Eduardo looked directly at Marcelo. Only I discovered that he had abandoned his family long ago. Miguel, who was listening to everything without fully understanding, asked innocently, "Uncle Eduardo, did Daddy steal money?" The child's question echoed through the hall like a gunshot. Eduardo knelt to answer him at his height. "He did something very wrong at work, Miguel. But the important thing is that he returned everything." "How did he manage to return SGD 2 million? Leticia asked incredulously. Eduardo smiled, but it was a bitter smile. That's the most interesting part of the story. He looked at Marcelo, who was sweating profusely. He sold the house he had bought with Isabella, the house where the boys were born and grew up. The revelation dropped like a nuclear bomb. Isabella's mouth fell open. "He sold our house?" Eduardo nodded. "He sold it and didn't tell you anything. He used the money to pay back what he stole, and still had some left over to impress his new girlfriend." Madame Miriam looked at her son as if she were seeing a monster. "Marcelo, you sold your children's house?" Mateus, who was trying to understand the adults' conversation, tugged Eduardo's blouse. "Uncle, what is selling a house?" Eduardo felt his chest tighten. How to explain to a 4-year-old that his father had sold the house where they lived? "Mateus, remember the old house where you lived with Mummy?" The boy nodded. "It's not yours anymore." The simple explanation devastated not only Mateus, but everyone who was listening. Miguel also looked confused. "Mummy, we can't go back to our house anymore?" Isabella hugged her children, trying not to cry in front of everyone. "No, my love. Now, our home is the small apartment." The boys fell silent, processing the information. Leticia was outraged. "Marcelo, how could you do that to the children?" And Sebastiana shook her head indignantly. Madame Miriam had tears in her eyes, finally understanding the kind of man she had raised. "My son," she said softly, "what have you become?" Eduardo realized it was time for the final blow, but the story doesn't end there. He looked around, making sure he had everyone's attention. When I started investigating Marcelo's personal life to understand the reason for the fraud, I discovered an incredible woman struggling alone to raise 2 wonderful children. He looked at Isabella with genuine love in his eyes. I discovered a mother who worked 2 jobs to pay the rent for a small apartment. A woman who never asked for alimony because she was too proud to beg from someone who abandoned her. Isabella felt her eyes fill with tears, but they were tears of emotion, not sadness. "And I discovered 2 children," Eduardo continued, placing a hand on Miguel and Mateus's shoulders, who, even abandoned by their father, even losing their home, even facing difficulties, continued to be the most polite and affectionate boys I have ever met. The twins snuggled into him, feeling the true love they had never had from their own father. Marcelo finally managed to speak. "Eduardo, please, don't do this here." His voice was supplicating, desperate. Eduardo looked at him without pity. "Do what, Marcelo?" "Tell the truth, the same truth you hid from your family for months." He stood up, standing at his full height as a powerful man. "The truth about you stealing, lying, abandoning, and still blaming the victim for your own mistakes." Madame Miriam stood up, trembling with rage. "Marcelo, you deceived me for years. You said Isabella was worthless, that she didn't take care of the children, that she destroyed the marriage." She looked at Isabella with tears in her eyes. "Forgive this blind old woman, my daughter." I believed his lies. Aunt Sebastiana also stood up. "Marcelo, you made us badmouth a saint. Isabella has always been an exemplary mother." Leticia was indignant. "Cousin, you've turned my wedding into an exhibition of your own shame." The bride was visibly upset by the situation. It was then that Miguel, with that devastating innocence of children, asked the question no one expected. "Mummy, why doesn't Daddy like us?" His voice was so small, so confused, that even the waiters stopped serving to listen. Mateus joined his brother. "Is it because we did something wrong?" The silence that followed was deafening. Isabella knelt in front of her children, holding their faces in her hands. "My princes, you never did anything wrong. You are perfect." Her tears began to stream. "Sometimes, adults make bad choices, and it has nothing to do with you." Eduardo also knelt beside her. "Miguel, Mateus, the problem was never with you. You are the most special boys in the world." He looked at Marcelo. "The problem is with whoever couldn't recognize the treasure they had." The twins threw themselves into Eduardo and Isabella's arms, forming a family hug that broke the hearts of everyone present. Madame Miriam couldn't take it anymore. She approached and also knelt, hugging her grandchildren. "My little grandchildren, forgive Grandma, I didn't know anything." Miguel and Mateus hugged her back, because children forgive easily when they feel true love. "Grandma, are you going to play with us now?" Mateus asked hopefully. "Yes, my angel. Grandma will make up for all the lost time." Madame Miriam looked at Isabella. "And if you let me, I want to be a real grandma again. I want to help. I want to be present." Isabella nodded, emotional. "Of course, Madame Miriam. They need their grandma." Marcelo remained standing there, watching his entire family turn against him and choose Isabella, watching his children find the love he had never been able to give, watching his ex-wife being treated like a queen by the man who paid his salary. The irony was so cruel it hurt physically. Eduardo stood up and looked directly at him. "Marcelo, you don't need to come to work on Monday." The phrase carried a sense of finality. Your termination is already being processed. Marcelo felt the ground crumble beneath him. Losing his job meant losing everything that remained of the life he had built on lies. "Eduardo, please," he begged. "I need the job." Eduardo shook his head. "You should have thought of that before trying to steal from me. and especially before abandoning this wonderful family. He looked at Isabella and the boys. Now they have someone who truly loves them. And at that moment, Marcelo understood that he had lost not just his job, he had lost everything forever. The party's mood had completely shifted. What began as a cruel plan of revenge had turned into a life lesson for the entire family. Marcelo was alone at a corner table, watching everyone gathered around Isabella, Eduardo, and the twins. Even his own mother had chosen his ex-wife's side. The loneliness he felt at that moment was the exact price of all the mistakes he had made. Eduardo realized the time had come for the most important moment of the night. He stood up, excused himself, and whispered something in Leticia's ear, who smiled and nodded excitedly. The bride took the microphone and drew everyone's attention. "Everyone, before we cut the cake, we have a special surprise here at the party." The entire ballroom turned to the table where Isabella and the boys were. Eduardo stood up, elegant as ever, but there was genuine nervousness in his movements. He looked at Miguel and Mateus, who watched him curiously. "Boys, may I ask permission to speak with your mummy?" The twins nodded, serious, as if they were little gentlemen granting official permission. Eduardo smiled at them, then looked at Isabella with that love that had grown in just a few days but felt eternal. "Isabella," he said, his voice more emotional than usual, "when I met you a few days ago, I thought I was just doing justice." He paused, looking around the ballroom, which was in absolute silence. "But I discovered I was finding the family I had searched for my entire life." Isabella felt her heart race. There was something different in his way of speaking. Something deeper, truer. Eduardo took a small blue velvet box from his pocket. The entire ballroom held its breath. Even Marcelo, at the corner table, stopped lamenting to pay attention. "Isabella, you taught me that family isn't about who you're born with, but who chooses to stay by your side when things get tough." He knelt right there in the middle of the ballroom, in front of hundreds of people. Miguel and Mateus immediately understood what was happening. "Mummy!" Miguel shouted excitedly. "Uncle Eduardo is going to ask you to marry him." Mateus clapped his hands, radiant. "Like in the movies." The boy's spontaneous reaction drew emotional laughs from everyone present. It was impossible not to be charmed by those two little princes cheering for their mother's happiness. "Isabella Santos," Eduardo said, opening the box and revealing a ring that sparkled like a star. "Will you marry me?" But before she could answer, he added something that made all the difference. "And Miguel and Mateus, will you accept me as your real father?" The twins didn't hesitate for a second. "Yes," they shouted in unison, throwing themselves onto Eduardo in a collective hug. Isabella was crying, but they were tears of pure happiness. "Eduardo," she said between sobs, "are you sure? We're a complicated family." He stood up, still holding the boys. "Isabella, you're not complicated. You're perfect, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that to all three of you." She extended her hand, trembling with emotion. Then, "Yes, 1,000 times yes." The ballroom erupted in applause. Leticia was crying with emotion. Madame Miriam also approached, in tears. "My daughter, forgive this stubborn old woman. You were always a perfect daughter-in-law, and I was too blind to see." Isabella hugged her, generous as ever. "It's already forgiven, Madame Miriam. Now, we are family again." Their reconciliation was one of the most touching moments of the night. Miguel tugged Eduardo's trousers, who was placing the ring on Isabella's finger. "Daddy Eduardo, can we call you real daddy now?" The question came out so naturally, so full of hope, that Eduardo had to try hard not to cry. "Yes, Miguel. It would be the greatest honor of my life." Mateus joined his brother. "Daddy, Eduardo, are you going to live with us?" Eduardo knelt again, getting to their height. "Not only will I live with you, I'll be the father you deserve to have from the beginning." He looked into the boy's eyes. "I'll be at every school performance, every soccer game, every important moment in your lives." Miguel and Mateus threw themselves into his lap, radiant. Aunt Sebastiana approached, visibly moved. "Eduardo, may God bless this beautiful family." She looked at Isabella. "My dear, you deserve all the happiness in the world." Other relatives also approached, all wanting to congratulate and apologize for the years of unjust criticism. The table where Isabella was became the center of the party. Across the hall, Marcelo remained alone. He had lost everything: his job, his family's respect, his children's love, and, most importantly, he had lost the chance to have been happy with an incredible woman and two wonderful children. He looked at that scene of happiness, knowing it could have been his if he had made different choices. Leticia, generous as always, approached Marcelo. Cousin, there's still time for you to change. She looked in the direction of the boys. They are your children. If you truly change, perhaps you can still be a part of their lives. Marcelo shook his head, defeated. Leticia, look how they look at him. Look how happy they are. I never managed to make them smile like that. Because you never truly tried, Leticia replied sincerely. Eduardo achieved in 3 days what you couldn't in 4 years. Do you know why? Because he genuinely loves them. Marcelo looked at his children playing with Eduardo and Isabela. It was true. They had never been as happy as they were at that moment. Eduardo approached the microphone, still with Miguel and Mateus clinging to him. Everyone, thank you for witnessing the happiest moment of my life. His voice echoed through the hall. But I want to take this opportunity to tell you all something important. The hall fell silent again. I met Isabela in a difficult situation. She was struggling alone, working double shifts, raising 2 children without anyone's help. Eduardo looked directly at Marcelo. And do you know what impressed me most about her? She never complained, never badmouthed the children's father, never tried to turn the boys against him. The message was clear to everyone. That's character. That's nobility. That's what makes someone truly special. Isabela held his hand, moved by his words. That's why, Eduardo continued, I want everyone to know that I found not just a wife, I found a complete family. I found the meaning of my life. He knelt and picked up Miguel and Mateus. And these 2 princes here taught me that being a father isn't about blood. It's about love, presence, dedication. Miguel, always talkative, took the microphone from Eduardo's hand. Everyone, he shouted with that spontaneity of children. Daddy Eduardo is the best daddy in the world. Mateus, less talkative but equally excited, shouted, He plays with us! The boy's innocence drew affectionate laughter from everyone. Eduardo spoke into the microphone again. Miguel, Mateus, I promise you and everyone here, I will be the father you deserve. I will protect you forever. I will love your mommy as she deserves to be loved. He looked at Isabela. And I will prove every day that family is about choice, not about chance. Madame Miriam approached the microphone. Can I say something too? Eduardo ceded the space to her. I want to publicly ask Isabela for forgiveness. Her voice trembled with emotion. For years I believed lies. I badmouthed a woman who only wanted to be a good mother and a good wife. She looked at her grandchildren. Isabela, you raised 2 angels, and I was too blind to see. Madame Miriam's public reconciliation moved everyone. Isabela stood up and hugged her in front of everyone. Thank you, Madame Miriam. The important thing is that now we are together. Miguel and Mateus also hugged their grandmother, definitively sealing peace in the family. Leticia took the microphone, radiant. Everyone, what a blessed wedding. We started with 1 union and ended with 2. She looked at Eduardo and Isabela. May God bless this beautiful family. You deserve all the happiness in the world. The ballroom erupted in applause again. As the party continued, Eduardo approached Isabela. Are you happy? She looked at Miguel and Mateus, playing with other children, completely integrated and joyful. I never thought it would be possible to be so happy. Eduardo smiled. It's just the beginning, my love. Our children will grow up knowing they are truly loved. Our children, she repeated, savoring the words. I like the sound of that. Eduardo kissed her softly. Family isn't who abandons you in hardship. Family is who finds you when you need them most. Isabela looked around, seeing all those people who now respected and loved her. Thank you for finding me. From the corner of the hall, Marcelo observed everything. He had learned the most painful lesson of his life. That true love cannot be forced, bought, or faked. Either it is given from the heart, or it is lost forever. He had lost the most precious family in the world for not knowing how to love when he had the chance. When the party ended, Eduardo, Isabela, Miguel, and Mateus left together. A real family, united by love, that chooses to stay, chooses to protect, chooses to build. They entered the limousine not as 4 separate people, but as an indestructible unit. Miguel snuggled into Eduardo's lap. Daddy, now we're a family of princes. Eduardo laughed, kissing the boy's forehead. Yes, we are. A royal family, Mateus completed. And Mummy is our queen. Isabela smiled, finally at peace. And you are my kings. The lesson was complete. Family is who loves you when you have nothing to offer but yourself. It's who sees you beautiful when you feel ugly. It's who protects you when the whole world attacks you. And sometimes that family isn't born with you. It finds you exactly when you need to be found the most.